Hi, John Leroux here at the Beaverbrook Art Gallery, and we're joined by Graham Nickerson of the New Brunswick Black History Society, and we're here today to talk to you about two masterworks in our international wing that people often pass by, look at, and oftentimes they don't look at a really important subtext and figures in it. Both of them have black figures in it, and we're talking about some things that deal with slavery and how blacks were depicted over 250 years ago in Western art. And the first one we're looking at here is from 1733, painting by a gentleman named Philippe Mercier, and it's called Bacchanalian Piece, Sir Thomas Samwell and Friends. And so we're looking at, it's pretty obvious, a bunch of white guys drinking. And this is Sir Thomas Samwell right here, who is a wealthy British gentleman with his friends. And oftentimes people look at this is really the party piece about consumption, about socializing, and oftentimes there's a figure that doesn't get noticed as much as it should, and that's what we're here to talk to you about today, which is actually the slave and servant named Caesar, who is right down here in the bottom corner. And in fact, he's actually named, all the figures in here are named with their last names, but Caesar just has his first name. And so Graham's going to tell you a little bit about Caesar.
So when we're looking at this piece, you're drawn to the main characters, but if you were a person of color, like myself, the first time I saw this painting, my attention's drawn to the person of color in the painting. It's just naturally for me, that's one of the things I would see, because it represents someone who looks like me. When we look at how he's depicted, you can see there is a hierarchy in slavery. So basically Nigerian slaves and Angolan slaves are considered to be only good for field work, basically.
Because of the color of their skin.
Because the color
their skin was darker.
And they're bigger, and because they're physically imposing, you want them as far away from the big house as possible. Mm-hmm. And you wouldn't have them around you in your house. Mm-hmm.
So technically they would call it, he's a house slave, or house servant.
Yes,
Is that okay?
Houseboy would be. So when you look at him, you're seeing like really what the statement here is. I've got a Northwestern African as my slave. Yeah,
and this is the owner, by the way. This is Samwell. It was his slave. Yeah.
So you're going to make him look. The idea is that these slaves are superior than Southern African slaves because they have more white genes in their body from Arab conquest and interaction with Europe and the Middle East. So he looks like the Porsche model of the era's slave. And so it's a form of like broadcasting affluence, right?
Even in his outfits, he has the turban, the feathers, he even has a dagger here. You can see that he's bringing a message.
Yes.
So maybe even some form of literacy, he may have been literate.
Yeah, that's another thing. If you look, he has a note. So it's like, look, my slave can read. Like it's all about ostentation.
Of course, yeah, it's about expression as well. Because even the painting is about an expression of wealth. He's wealthy enough to bring his friends over to drink, and also, here's my slave.
Right.
Which I think that one of the challenging things, and why it's good we're talking about this today, people look at this painting as a celebration, as a sort of social, as a party. And it is, but one of the people in it is using his slave, his property. So that's as much property to him as this bottle is in reality. So that the subtext of this is pretty heavy.
And Caesar was not his birth name. Right.
No, of course not, yeah. That he would have been snatched as probably a young boy from his family in some capacity, and
Yeah, and so one of the things that slave owners tended to do is, you break in your slave by taking away their African identity and giving them, in this case, they use names like Caesar and Apollo and Titus, the same sort of thing. Imagine a Doberman or a Rottweiler, those kind of names. So if you look closely, you can see that there's a metallic collar around Caesar's neck with a chain link there, or a medallion. So that would be his slave collar, and that would allow Caesar would be able to go out on the town if you were delivering that message or going to get it, so that if he were to try and run off, then they would be able to capture him and see who his owner was or where he came from.
right. Because Samuel's name would be engraved on it.
Yeah, something like Samuel's name would be engraved on it, or the manor that he belonged to, or something along those lines. Now, another thing is, we're in the Enlightenment period now, and so there is a level of equality in these these white gentlemen. But this slave collar could also, and the position of Caesar in the painting, is to sort of say, well, we're enlightened, but don't confuse. This is our slave, not part of the gang.
Yeah, visually, he is definitely not part of that group.
Right. It's an interesting topic in terms of just the imagery of it and what does it actually mean. And it means, like, these people know what this means. Right?
Mm-hmm.
We're kind of reacquainting ourselves
Yeah.
with the imagery of the time.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to say, because even the Beaverbrook, when this is shown, rarely is this shown in the context of talking about Caesar. They'll often sometimes say, yes, that they'll name him in the figures, but that's it. But just to say, there's a slave. He's also the only one looking away. Everyone's looking at us, almost inviting us in. As sort of, the idea is that white viewers would have seen this, but the one person in there actually working, looking away, doing a job is the slave. So already there's a visual hierarchy there as well. Everyone's at that one level, he's down. There's some interesting visual things happening. Thanks to this, Graham. And you want to go on to the next piece?
Yes, let's go there.
Great. So the next painting we're looking at is a strong masterwork in our collection that too often gets passed by because, at least in Canada, a lot of people don't think of the artist John Copley. But Copley is one of the most important American artists of the late 18th century. He's revered in New England, and a version of this painting that measures about 8 feet by 8 feet is one of the centerpieces of the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. This is called Brook, Watson, and the Shark, and it's a smaller study of a painting that was actually done 3 times by the artist, and oftentimes, hundreds of years ago, it's not like today where there's this cult of originality of one work. An artist would often repaint the same work several times because if someone would buy it, they'd say, sure, let's do another version. There are 3 enormous versions of this around the world, and this is a much smaller version of it. And so here you can see, there's the figure down there about to get eaten by the shark. The story goes, this is Brook Watson, who was a young man who was in Havana, Cuba, fell off a boat and had his leg actually bitten off by a shark. This truly happened. Watson became a well-known politician. He actually was mayor of London in the late 1700s, and he walked around with a peg leg. And so this is a narrative of that story. And you can see the figures in here. There's several figures trying to rescue him. There's the shark, someone spearing the shark in Havana Harbor. But at the very top of the pyramid of people is the black figure who's actually holding the rope that ended up saving Brook Watson. And unlike the slave that we saw at the back in the alien piece, this figure is strong. He's showing some empathy and concern for this, and he's a bit. He's also the highest figure, so there's much more equality in it, but a strength of character and concern as well.
Okay, so looking at it, the time of this painting is mid-1770s, and so we're really starting to see the idea of liberty and equality and all of these things. So one place that you would really see a lot more egalitarian ideals is in the marine trade. There are lots of blacks involved in the maritime industry at this time. And so poor white sailors and blacks and Africans, they would all be together. And so coming from Massachusetts, there's no doubt that Copley would have been familiar with sort of seamen traveling around in sort of multi-ethnic groups and how all of that worked together. What's part of the whole racism thing is like when you depict Africans, enslaved Africans, they're in loincloths and they show absolutely no signs of humanity or no, like these people were skilled, right? They were forestmen or lumbermen or sailors or artisans and those sorts of things. And like we talked about in the earlier piece, people from North Africa, from Northern Africa, Northwest Africa, they were much more in high regard because they were thought of to be smarter, but they also had trades. And one of these trades were they were incredibly good with small vessels like this.
They were mariners, yeah.
Yes, and especially riverboat, like this size vessel, they're called surf boats. So it would be these kind of small whaleboats and things like that. They would be adept at handling. So it's no surprise. Like it would make perfectly good sense to a person who in the 1770s who looked at this painting would be like, oh yeah, okay.
A black sailor.
A black sailor, yeah. There's nothing shocking here.
And we forget that today.
Yeah, right? Completely written off. In preparing for this talk, I found I'm from Shelburne, Nova Scotia. I found an account of a black from Birchtown, Nova Scotia, which is just over the hill from Shelburne, who was on Admiral Nelson's flagship, the Victory, during the Battle of Trafalgar. It's hard, I don't know enough about Copley, his personal beliefs, but I can see this to be a metaphor, easily, for, I can see overtones of like abolition and emancipation and those sorts of things to say like, you know, by recognizing black humanity, I'm getting saved. Or that kind of like, and he would have seen, because he was a Tory, so he would have had more British mores of, just simply by his politics, that the British were more advanced in their ideology of what equality was.
This figure in one of the larger paintings that Copley did of Brook Watson and the shark is a figure that is distinctly the same person that Copley did in another small portrait of a black man, and not subservient at all. It's the idea of this sort of inner light, this intelligence, this caring really comes out in that portrait. So you can tell that emotionally and within his own views of the world, that he had certainly a strong respect for humanity.
You sort of take this image and you compare it to later, say mid 1800s, with the racialized black mammy and Jim Crow type imagery. It's, you know, this is almost a century before that.
Yeah, this is before, or 150 years before Aunt Jemima and those kinds of things, yeah.
So it really makes, it's like, when we talk about historical representation of blacks, it's not like it all was this steady stream of like more humanity. It's like, this reflects a battle of that contemporary culture saying, what do we collectively feel about the place in society of black people? And you have this ideology, which went forth and led to abolition. And then you have the other ideology, which leads to like black mammies and all of that artistic line of...
Yeah, the dismissive caricature kind of things. Yeah, which there's absolutely none in this.
Right.
You know, he's one of the two sort of most powerful figures in this. In fact, in my mind, probably the most so. Because he actually is caring for Brook Watson. This guy wants to kill the shark, which is important, but he wants to save the man.
And I would say that you know, in modern times, if your perception is this, then chances are you've interacted with this type of open-minded and historical, factual representation of what blacks were giving to society.